Good morning and welcome to Allen Avenue Unitarian Universalist Church's in-person and online worship. Whether today is your first time here or you've been coming for years, we are so glad you are with us. My name is Cynthia Martin. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm serving as this morning's worship associate. We are a growing community that transforms lives through the power of love. Our mission calls us to celebrate diversity, encourage spiritual growth, and promote social responsibility while we travel on and care for the earth. A special welcome to those at home who are joining us on Zoom today. If you're attending for the first time, please go to our website and fill out the welcome card so we can know more about you. And a special welcome, too, to our guest preacher this morning, Reverend Norm Allen, joining us from First Parish downtown, where Rev Tara is leading worship today, a Portland pulpit swap. Reverend Norm has been serving First Parish in Portland for just a year and a half. He and his partner Gary came to Maine from Washington, D.C., where Rev Norm served the Davies Unitarian Universalist congregation for 6 years, and where he served as consulting minister for adult spiritual development at All Souls. Reverend Norm is also a playwright whose works for the theater have been produced throughout the United States, Asia, and Europe. His essays have appeared in publications ranged from Smithsonian Magazine to the Washington Post and Boston Globe. A former English teacher, he served as a consultant to the Center for Inspired Teaching in Washington, D.C., where he mentored first-year teachers in the public schools. As you'll learn this morning, he has a deep love for our Unitarian Universalist history and the many ways it can fuel our work in the world today. Welcome. I do have a few announcements. Are you searching for a way to make meaningful action in this political climate? Please come here to church on Friday afternoons for 1 hour at 2 p.m. A group of us has gathered to exchange ideas and information on steps to take in resistance to what is happening locally and nationally. We have a name, we're working on it. I want to call it FAC, but I think it will become Friday Afternoon Calls for Action. We are sponsored by the Social Justice Committee, but we are an open group. Please join us. And you can talk to me after the service if you have any questions. Share the Plate nominations are needed. We only have 2 nominations so far. It is our tradition to share 1/3 of each Sunday's offering to a nonprofit organization chosen by members of the congregation. Do you have a nonprofit organization that you would like to nominate for the next church year? If so, there's a link to submit your nomination in the e-blast. Paper forms are also available on the Social Justice Bulletin Board in the foyer. Nominations will be collected through Sunday, March 30th. The Social Justice Committee will evaluate the nominees and make recommendations to the board. For more information, see Jim Mason or Julie Harrison. Are you searching for I already read that one. I am searching. On Wednesday, March 5th at 6 p.m. in room 79 and on Zoom, Reverend Tara will be hosting a community grief circle for those of us holding grief, anger, or fear either in our personal life or in relation to what's happening in our country and wider world. There will be a ritual as well as time for sharing. More info this is handwritten, this is hard for me. More info is on the bulletin board in the foyer and will be in this week's e-news. The Zoom link can be found on Breeze. Now we invite you to take this opportunity to silence your cell phones so that we can be fully present to one another. And after the service, grab a cup of coffee or tea in the kitchen window and stay for conversation. But we'll also magically be moving some delicious food into the sanctuary to enjoy for our postponed Valentine's Day potluck. Those on Zoom are invited to stay on and connect with one another. And now let us center our hearts and minds with the ringing of the chimes.
Good morning. I am Reverend Norman Allen. I go by Reverend Norm, and I use the pronouns he and his. I am delighted to be here with you this morning as Reverend Tara and I embrace the time-honored tradition, Unitarian tradition of swapping pulpits and strengthening the relationship between our congregations here in Portland. There is a lot that we have in common between First Parish and Allen Avenue, and a lot that is very different between First Parish and Allen Avenue. With that in mind, it feels appropriate that we begin our service this morning with words from Reverend Samuel Longfellow, words that he preached back in the 19th century, words that celebrate the theological diversity that is central to our faith, words that celebrate the freedom of thought that is central to our principles of democracy. Reverend Sam Longfellow writes, "We will take for our basis not a creed, but the Spirit. We will agree to differ in our theological opinions and beliefs while we strive in a common law of the truth after higher and clearer views of it. Believing that only through freedom can the truth be reached, we will put no shackles on any, nor place any obstacle, even of coldness or suspicion, in the way of freest thinking. And regarding this freedom as more precious than uniformity of belief, we will make it more prominent than any doctrine." And so with the freest thinking as our goal this morning and every morning, come, let us worship together.
As we light our sanctuary chalice this morning, those joining on Zoom are invited to light a chalice or candle near you to connect us more deeply with one another. This morning, we remember that our great forebears faced obstacles as great or greater than ours. Like us, they would find resonance in the words of Reverend Leslie Takahashi, who writes, "All that we have ever loved and all that we have ever been stands with us on the brink of all that we aspire to create: a deeper peace, a larger love, a more embracing hope, a greater generosity of spirit, a deepening joy in this life we share." Our opening hymn this morning is 189, Light of Ages and of Nations, in your gray hymnal and up on the screen. The lyrics are by Reverend Samuel Longfellow, whose life and work we celebrate this morning. Dale will play it through once, then you may rise in body or spirit as we sing together.
How's that? I figure I couldn't hear it, but I thought people would start giving me dirty looks if they couldn't hear me. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. Did everyone hear? We're gonna do some shout outs of the things we love, basically. So we're gonna start kind of easy, kind of low ball, and I want to hear a couple of people shout out just things that you love. So it could be a toy, it could be a special meal. What do people love? Chocolate, excellent. Your cat, excellent. Pickleball I hear all the time. What else? Chili relleno, nice. Dancing. We had a contra dance on Valentine's Day at First Parish. It was very popular, lots of fun. Anything else that you... Ice cream, I was waiting for ice cream, top of my list. More cats. I don't hear dogs. I don't hear dogs. Thank you. The ocean. Anything up here, things that you like especially? Nature. Thunderstorms. Oh, I like that. Nice. Snow days, yes. You know, what's that? Summer. Over here.
Our dog redwood tree.
A dog redwood tree. I'll have to come back to make sure I see that. Singing. All right, yeah. Indoor pools, yes, especially right now. All right, now let's think of places you love. We've heard a couple of them already, but places. Portland, Maine, Acadia, Paris, your house. That's a great place to love. Ferry Beach. Anything else? Cork. Scarborough Beach. Tortola. The Cloisters in New York?
Yes.
Yes, I am with you on that one.
This church and land.
This church and land, yes.
My shop.
What's that?
My shop.
Your shop. Excellent. Now let's think of activities that you love. Remember, we're holding on to these things because these things are not especially good, right? Hopefully not going to change. What are some activities that you love? Skiing, excellent. Walking, bicycling. Reading. Singing. We heard dancing earlier. Fencing. Nice. What's that? Painting. Playing games. Snorkeling. This is a very active group. One more. Jigsaw puzzles. And what? Feeding the birds, very nice. And they're starting to show up again right now. Very important. And now finally, people. Because again, people, we're going to depend on each other so much, we already do, in our interdependent web of existence. Who are the people you love?
My children.
Your children.
My small group.
Your small group.
My neighbors.
Your neighbors. Grandchildren. Your spouse. Co-workers. Friends, girlfriends. Church family. Nice.
Health workers.
Health workers. Wife. Let's take a moment now. Yeah.
Governor Mills standing up.
Governor Mills standing up. We have a tradition. It's a tradition since I've shown up at First Parish that at a statement like that, the entire congregation shouts out the word huzzah. So for Janet Mills, on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3, huzzah! Reverend Tara's going to kill me for that. Okay. Granite Janet. Oh, I love that. Nice. Okay, so this kind of was a perfect segue. So now we don't have to shout these out, but I would love everyone in the room, I'll count to 3, say the name of a person you love. So instead of spouse, friend, pick one name. Yeah, one name. We could do it a few times. And share the name of a person that you love. 1, 2, 3. There. Maybe a second person. 1, 2, 3. And a final 1, 2, 3. Beautiful. Now, here comes the little preaching part before we wrap up the Time for All Ages. I'm going to be talking about Sam Longfellow a lot during the sermon, certainly. Sam Longfellow lived over about 150 years ago, was in a 40-year relationship with another minister named Sam Johnson. He, in his time, they, in their time, of course, could not have stood in or sat in a room like this and said the name of the person they loved most. And in many places in the United States today, people would not be comfortable doing that, and certainly in places around the world, you could actually be killed for doing that. So not everybody has the opportunity to do what we just did, and Reverend Samuel Longfellow never had the opportunity to say in public, "I love you, Sam Johnson." So we are going to do that right now. We're going to do it 3 times, as we've done a couple of other things. We're going to say, "I love you, Sam Johnson," on behalf of Sam Longfellow. We're going to say it once, we're going to say it twice, we're going to say it a 3rd time, and each time we're going to say it louder, and our goal is for Sam Johnson, wherever he may be, to hear us. Are you ready? Simply, "I love you, Sam Johnson," on 3. 1, 2, 3. "I love you, Sam Johnson." And again, "I love you, Sam Johnson." And one more time, "I love you, Sam Johnson." And how about a huzzah? Huzzah! Thank you so much. I think I'm handing it off to Sonia now for moving things along from there. Thank you. Your participation was moving to my heart. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Reverend Norm. My name is Sonia Tonelli. I am one of a religious education leader today, along with Jen Brady and Patricia Allen. In a few moments, some of us will leave the sanctuary to enjoy the religious education programming. But first, I invite the lamplighter to join me in the pulpit, and today that is Dexter. Dexter is a pro. The lamplighter is entrusted to transfer the light of the sanctuary chalice to the lamp, and then go forth to RE spaces where they will light the chalice there. And Dexter knows how to do this better than I do. I invite those going to RE to follow the lamplighter as we carry the flame, expanding our sacred space.
I invite you on site and online to join me as we hold in the spirit of prayer and resistance those around the globe now vulnerable to malaria, tuberculosis, HIV, childhood diarrhea, and other deadly diseases because of the removal of foreign aid. We hold in the spirit of prayer and of resistance those immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers, our neighbors who now live in fear of arrest, and the families who live in fear of being separated from their loved ones. We hold in the spirit of prayer and of resistance those in the transgender community who are now being denied life-giving, gender-affirming care. We hold in the spirit of prayer and of resistance those in the transgender community now being denied their right to protect our nation. And we honor the transgender military personnel who have risked their lives on our behalf, a tradition that reaches back to the American Revolution. We hold in the spirit of prayer and of resistance the vast tracts of wilderness, of diverse and complex landscapes now under threat of drilling and other forms of exploitive and destructive attacks on the land and its inhabitants. With all of this in our hearts, let us consider these prayerful words from Reverend Lynn Cox. They write, "Spirit of life, ancestor of the stars and the sun, you who embrace the vastness of space and us along with it, be with us today. Hold us in our worry, our exhaustion, our grief. Keep us close as we sit with our truth, whatever that may be. Lead us to rest in the quiet, to find solace and renewal in this time of shifting light and dark. You whose arms open with the spinning galaxies, help us to make room as you do for all that is. Open our hearts to our loved ones, our neighbors, the beings with whom we share this planet. Lead us to reach out to others in compassion. Turn us toward one another in mercy, right relationship, and reconciliation. You who have seen the rising and setting of suns, of seasons, of civilizations, remind us of all that we have learned from the history of the world and from our own histories. Give us the courage to face our mistakes and to repair them whenever possible. Help us understand our interdependence, our gravitational relatedness with all of the other spinning lives around us, and lead us to treat those relationships with care. In this space, filled with people among us who shine like stars, this space filled with the sparkle of love and care, we give thanks for this moment to be together. May our senses be open to the beauty of this day, this season, this world. And let us continue our contemplation in a brief and silent pause. Blessed be, and amen.
Now is the time in our service where we engage in the spiritual practice of generosity. Our gifts support the ministries of this congregation and our work in the broader community. Each week, 1/3 of our offering is given away to a local nonprofit organization doing work to advance our shared values in the world. This month's Share the Plate recipient, chosen by our youth group, is Maine Boys to Men, whose mission is to end all forms of male violence and self-harm and to advance gender equity by supporting the development of self-aware, empathetic boys and men. Donations can be made now as the basket is passed through the donate button on our website, or if you are a member on Breeze, remembering to make note that your gift is for Share the Plate. If you are visiting us for the first time, please know that your presence is your gift to us. At this time, our offering will be collected and gratefully received.
Catherine Hilliard met Reverend Samuel Longfellow when she was just 14 years old, and she had this to say in remembrance. It was said that while Henry Wadsworth Longfellow was made a poet, Samuel was born one. And also it was said that he was good enough to be a saint and interesting enough to be a sinner. He was certainly a mystic. Our reading this morning brings together Reverend Sam's gifts of poetry and mysticism, depicting a life at its final hour and the soul discovering that heaven and earth are in fact one. It's called The Golden Sunset. The golden sea its mirror spreads beneath the golden skies, and but a narrow strip between of earth and shadow lies. The cloud-like cliffs, the cliff-like clouds, dissolved in glory float, and midway of the radiant floods hangs silently the boat. The sea is but another sky, the sky a sea as well, and which is earth and which the heavens, the eye can scarcely tell. So when, for me, life's latest hour soft passes to its end, may glory, born of earth and heaven, the earth and heaven blend. Flooded with light, the spirits float, with silent rapture glow, to where the earth ends and heaven begins, the soul shall scarcely know. The words you've just heard sung echo Reverend Sam Longfellow's own poetry and mysticism that we just heard. He would have recognized that longing to know her, the maker of heaven, knitter of sinews and planter of grains, the sculptor who carved earth from darkness. So thank you to the choir for those words. We see the name Longfellow everywhere we go here in Portland. It's impossible to escape, but it's almost always referring to Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, one of the great poets of our past and a celebrity, a superstar in his own time. No one talks about Henry Wadsworth's little brother, Sam, who lived his life out of the spotlight, who lived a life of resonance and care, a life filled with children and friends, a life that had a lasting impact on our Unitarian Universalist faith, a life shaped by his 40-year relationship with his beloved Reverend Samuel Johnson. Sam Longfellow was born here in Portland in 1819. He grew up over at my beloved First Parish congregation. Along with the other children there, he would visit the home of Reverend Ichabod Nichols, whose portrait hangs in our parish hall and who brought the Unitarian faith to Portland. In true UU fashion, Dr. Nichols would lead the kids in a little religious exploration, then turn their attention to science. Sam remembered that Reverend Nichols, quote, showed us a microscope and gave us a shock with an electrical machine. Sam loved Portland and returned often, especially to spend time with his mother, with whom he was very close. He was here when he became ill and died at the age of 73. After a memorial service at First Parish, he was, we thought, buried in the Western Cemetery alongside his parents. You can visit the Longfellow tomb embedded in the hillside. But when that tomb was opened in the 1980s to check for structural damage, it was found to be empty. To this day, no one knows where the bodies of Reverend Samuel Longfellow and his parents might lie. So there's mystery. There's the connection to Portland history and to Unitarian history. So what? Why spend a Sunday morning talking about Reverend Samuel Longfellow, a famous poet's little brother? Well, on a personal note, I just have an enormous crush on the guy. My partner, Gary, knows. I've told him, I've been open about this. He's okay with it, I hope. After our years together, Gary's learned that I occasionally become deeply enamored of men who have been dead for a couple of centuries. But there are other reasons, not personal to me, but important, meaningful reasons to explore Sam Longfellow's life this morning. Reverend Samuel Longfellow was a gay man in a lifelong loving relationship with Reverend Samuel Johnson. And as with so many members of the LGBTQ plus community, their story has gone largely untold, swept under the rug, minimized and dismissed by homophobic historians. I was so grateful, so moved when I toured the Longfellow home, not here, but in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I heard the tour guide name without fuss or fanfare that Samuel Longfellow and Samuel Johnson were partners. A simple statement with enormous significance. Growing up as a gay kid in the 1960s and 70s, I was denied my role models. I was denied my own history. The great LGBTQ plus figures of the past were recast as heterosexual and cisgender. No history professor, no textbook mentioned the hundreds of transgender men who fought in the American Civil War. Biographers and classroom teachers found bizarre, convoluted ways to explain why Shakespeare and Michelangelo were writing love poems to young men. In high school, I read a biography of Walt Whitman that said that he wasn't gay. Walt Whitman, who writes about meeting hunky guys on the Broadway omnibus and taking them home to Brooklyn for the night. Somehow not gay. Homophobia comes into play when historians apply a standard of evidence to name someone homosexual that they don't even consider when they name someone heterosexual, because they see heterosexuality as the norm and homosexuality as a deviance from that norm. I experienced this firsthand when I wrote a series of documentaries for PBS. The producers would not allow me to say that portrait artist John Singer Sargent was gay. There is no question that he was, but I couldn't say it unless I had proof that he'd actually had sexual intercourse with another man. It's a shocking example, and a common one, of people's ignorance about the queer experience and about human relations in general. I could spend my entire life in celibacy and I would still be a gay man, just as a heterosexual person could spend their entire life in celibacy and still be straight. Straight being a problematic term, if there ever was one. To be gay, to be lesbian, to be bisexual, to be straight is as much about who we fall in love with as it is about who we sleep with. Reverend Samuel Longfellow was a man in love with another man. And we know that it was love at first sight. I recall as if it were yesterday, he wrote of Sam Johnson, the dark animated countenance, the flowing hair, the earnest musical tones, the light quick movement from one foot to the other, the whole air of inspiration. It was as fascinating as it was unlooked for. This must have been in July. In the autumn of the same year, when I entered the divinity school, I soon found him out among my classmates. The same fascination drew me toward him, and then began a friendship which continued for 40 years. Those 40 years included studying together at Harvard Divinity, traveling through Europe, hiking through New England, collaborating on a series of hymnals for theologically liberal congregations. A few years into those 4 decades, Sam Longfellow spent time in the Azores as tutor to an American family, a sort of gap year as he considered whether to enter the ministry. From his room in the middle of the Atlantic, he writes to Sam Johnson in New England, conjuring his lover's presence. Often, my friend, have you come and walked beside me in my evening ramble, or opened the door of this chamber as you used to do that of my room at Harvard, and this not as a thing of fancy, but a reality. Reverend Sam's biographer, Joseph May, writes of the two men, the confidential intercourse between Reverend Longfellow and Reverend Johnson discloses a perfect harmony and the unrestricted but delicate intimacy of two rare and noble spirits. Letters frequent and full, usually serious, often playful, always affectionate, passed between the pair. No experience was passed unnoted, no emotion was unshared between these two friends. They found in each other something of that support and comfort which they were not seeking in the marriage state. Both men did remain unmarried, marriage not being available to them. They used the nicknames Damon and Pythias, epitomes of the ancient Greek tradition of love between men. The great Unitarian Reverend Edward Everett Hale was among their closest friends and used a different line of mythology to describe their relationship. He wrote, "There existed for 40 years an intimacy which could hardly have been understood by David and Jonathan." You may recall in the Bible, David and Jonathan, quote, become one in spirit. They create a marriage-like covenant and are described as sharing a love that surpasses the love of women. Reverend Hale tells us that the two Sams, as they were known, had something greater than David and Jonathan. Reverend Samuel Longfellow, a gay man deeply in love, setting an example for us about what it means to be a devoted, dedicated, loving partner, and a role model for the LGBTQ plus community in particular, part of our heritage, part of our story. I now own first editions of his memoir and his essays and sermons, published in 1894. They are often part of my morning reading practice, texts that I turn to in my pre-dawn hour of study. I look to Reverend Sam now for guidance and encouragement. He echoes everything I learned as a chaplain at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore. In a letter to Sam Johnson, he alludes to the non-anxious presence that is at the center of pastoral care. He writes, "Spiritually, I feel that a minister needs to reach that height which shall make him equally calm in the presence of the joyous and of the suffering, which shall practically reconcile those apparent contrasts and discords that are always side by side in life. But what self-conquest and baptism of the Spirit before that height of spiritual health can be reached?" We've already heard his words about theological diversity, about how the great underlying truths are available to all. In his essays and sermons, he gives the word God a radical new meaning, making it inclusive of multiple, layered, complex, and contradictory understandings. He's a champion of social justice, of abolition, and of women's rights. At the National Women's Rights Convention in New York, he joins a roster of speakers headed by Susan B. Anthony. He tells the crowd, "Let the wide sphere of work be open to woman, that she may select from it just as man does, whatever her strength and skill are sufficient for her to accomplish. She is not to be shut up to a few poor, small, and wretchedly paid employments by which she can, with her own hands and skill, gain a living, but is to be allowed and encouraged to open to herself every variety of employment wherein she shall be paid an equal sum with that which man is paid for doing the same work, a claim which has been too long ignored and set aside." He spoke those words in 1860. He would be sad to learn that as recent as 2023, women earned on average 16% less than men, receiving 84 cents for every dollar earned by a male counterpart. In that same speech of 1860, he calls for greater fluidity between the stereotypes of male and female. He writes, "If home be the sphere of woman, it is also a sphere for man, a sphere which he altogether too much neglects, not knowing how high and noble it is, and that his duty lies at home, however much he ignores it. But when it is said that home is woman's only sphere, it is simply a mistake. It is simply a narrow statement." Reverend Sam didn't just talk about the idea, the fluidity of gender roles, he lived them. In 1861, tragedy strikes the family of his older brother, of Henry Wadsworth. Henry's wife, Fanny, dies of burns received when her dress catches fire. In trying to save her, Henry himself is horribly burned. His recovery is slow and followed by grief and depression. In his own words, he is inwardly bleeding to death. Henry and Fanny's 6 children are plunged into sorrow and confusion, one parent dead, the other beyond their reach. It's their uncle who comes to the rescue, becoming mother and father both. His biographer, Joseph May, says of Sam's nieces and nephews, "They confided to him without reserve their girlish and boyish interests. secure that nothing which concerned them would ever be trivial in his eyes. He was adopted with equal warmth and trust by their companions, and to all indiscriminately became Uncle Sam. One of the children remembered, quote, "We had a little school in the house, and he was constantly in and out of the schoolroom on most familiar terms with the children, sometimes aiding the discipline, quite as often disturbing it. And his own room was always a refuge for sad or rebellious scholars." Over and again, Reverend Samuel Longfellow sets an example for us, sets a standard for us to attain. We're not all called to stand in lofty pulpits or give speeches alongside Susan B. Anthony, or write essays that awaken the reader to a more expansive, freer understanding of the divine. But we are called, each of us, to offer the gift of our presence when it's needed. When it's needed by a struggling family member, needed by a friend in distress, needed by a city facing a crisis of homelessness and addiction, needed by a nation facing an attack on its democratic principles. Reverend Sam models the rich, generous, fulfilling life that we might lead when we turn our attention outside ourselves and focus it on others, on our most intimate partners, and on the wider world. He shows us how it's done, through kindness and affection and humor, through being, quote, equally calm in the presence of the joyous and of the suffering, reconciling those apparent contrasts and discords that are always side by side in life. I wish this city had raised as many tributes to Reverend Samuel Longfellow as it has to his more famous older brother, but better than any statue would be our commitment to follow this great, quiet man, to follow his lead, to learn from his example, and to act upon it. May it be so. Amen. Our closing hymn is number 345, "With Joy We Reclaim the Growing Light," in your gray hymnal and up on the screen. In it, Reverend Sam reminds us that the light is indeed growing, both literally and figuratively. Dale will play it through once, then you may rise in body or spirit and join in singing. I invite you to take a breath, to close your eyes, and to welcome into your minds and hearts these words from Reverend Samuel Longfellow. He sends us out from this sacred space, sacred on site and online, ready for the joyous, unexpected moments in our lives. He writes, "Life is full of such surprises. You feel the truth of it in your own experience as soon as I say it. With all that is regulation and all that is routine in your life, you know how large an element there is of the unexpected. With all the accustomed satisfactions that are sure as the morning light or daily bread, there come constantly the unlooked-for joys. In the midst of disappointment about something we hoped for and planned for, there comes something we did not hope or look for, to make us feel that we are not forsaken, and that life is a blessing after all. I'm so grateful to be here with you this morning. Thank you.